Okay. Maybe we can start with a show of hands from the audience. How many of us work at organizations that operate internationally? Quite a few, but not everybody. Well, the good news is that it's never been easier to go global. And Juan Pablo, maybe we can start by having you tell us a little bit about why it's such an opportunity today.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Hello, one. Can you hear me? Hey, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Now, perfect. Now, hear me? No? Call me. Hey, now. Can you hear me now? Perfect. Mike. Hello. Now, perfect. Sorry for the delay. No, thank you very much for the question. Something that we were discussing before was that today, with all the technology that has been, created, it's so easy to create a global company. If we spoke maybe 3 or 4 years ago, it was really hard to incorporate a company in the US and in the rest of the world. It was hard to receive payments online. It was hard to get a bank account or a credit card. And then today, it takes only minutes. You can get an international credit card with GIFs. You can receive payments from all over the world with Juno. It has become extremely easy to go from one country to another one.
Mada, branches customers all over the world. Is that something you set out to achieve? Did it just happen because you were offering something that was useful everywhere?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we set it up from the beginning. We started in the US, and then I was trying to get more customers, and I actually, I was very early, very naive, and I didn't really know how to run Facebook ads properly. So I put all the money in English-speaking countries, and then it turned out that all my money went to India. I realized a week later, and then we had so many people in India using Branch, and we're like, wow, we have all these customers, we should open an office. So it's actually kind of like a mistake, but then we started realizing, mobile is, and I'm speaking on Panda Cup about the importance of mobile. Mobile is really everywhere, and if you're a company with a mobile presence, it's very unlikely that you're going to exist just in one country or one language. So we realized early on that even though our first international expansion was a little bit of it was kind of an accident, the rest of it was extremely intentional, because the only way we could go for these really large mobile companies was to exist and support companies globally.
Dilip, we've seen lots of evidence recently that it's hard just to be a bank in one country. Jeeves helps companies be global by offering global banking services. Can you talk a little bit about how you are able to do that, and why it's important, why you're offering something that's valuable as companies think about?
I think for us from day one, the goal was to go global. And the premise, and I'm a second-time founder, I feel like when you look at building companies, you should look at what are large macro trends. And it was very clear to me that companies are going global faster and faster, but banking is still country and currency specific. So our real sweet spot is if you are a company operating more than one country, that's where we feel like we can really shine. And as being someone that didn't have a fintech background, I think that's probably one of the reasons where I'm like, why not do this in 20 countries, right? And then you get started and you learn just a lot more about regulation, compliance, etc. And banking is one area you can't really, take compliance or regulation easy, right? And so for us, we spent about 12 months before we launched building out the infrastructure stack. And a lot of what we built doesn't make sense if you only operate banking services in one country, because it's a lot of overhead. But if you're trying to do it in 20 countries, you're trying to do it across 2-3 different continents, then it makes sense because you can spread out that cost across these different areas, whether it's issuing statements, issuing cards, transaction monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we were purposeful from the beginning about the fact that our box is, if you are a company that operates in more than one country, that's where we feel like we can shine. And that was the idea behind the infrastructure, behind how we set up compliance and so on. And I think the second part here is when you think about even building your own team, it's hard to do that when you're in just one country, right? And so a big part of how we looked at even building the company was one of my first key hires was bringing in a chief people officer, because I knew this was not my core skill set, and that's something that I can use a lot of help in. So just being very kind of direct and conscious about what you want to do from day one has been helpful for us.
Let's give some advice to folks who are thinking about how to start on going global. How do you decide which countries to target? Should you identify one or two that make sense, or try to go as broad as possible?
So for our perspective, we look at three things. So one, is it a country that's opening up on fintech regulation, right? There are parts of the world that it just wouldn't make sense for us to really operate in. Brazil obviously is one that's very open and opening up on the fintech side, so that was kind of a no-brainer for us. I think the second one is, where do you see capital outflows? Because if you're seeing funds going outside, they need banking services to be able to use that. And the third one is there infrastructure that we can plug into, right? And I think a lot of international building is you have to build part of that stack yourself. And so when I think of Jeeves, I think of it as kind of an API company with a customer-facing component. It's just that our API is just for ourselves, like a homegrown Marqeta. So, there are countries we would never operate in, but I think if you look at kind of the world outside of the US, it was very, very clear that there are countries where just so much innovation with so much capital coming in that banking services, especially a unified platform, made sense for us.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. When we started international expansion, it was maybe 8 years ago, we were thinking a lot more about the potential of a country, and I built this, 4-stage. You first do a lot of research, and then you send someone, and then you see how many meetings you can get, and then you really understand if the market is there a need, and then you actually try to close a few accounts, and then you're like, okay, we're actually have some revenue coming from this region, let's go and expand. And it was really focused on just is there revenue there? Can we build and grow there? And I think in today's world, we think a lot more about, not just about that, but also about the cost. How expensive would it be to actually support that region? Will it be, it's not just can we make revenue, but can we make sustainable revenue with really good ROI? Is this a region that you can do certain functions from other places, or does it all have to be in region? China is a really good example. If you go and you sell to the export business, you can actually make money there, but you can't actually sell to the local business, so there's a limited potential. And supporting China is very expensive, and you have to do it all in country. You can't go and do, marketing in China from the US. Everything is so different and so localized that it's actually harder to get the right ROI from a region like that versus, say something like Mexico. If you're in US, it actually is simpler. It's similar hours, you can do a lot of marketing, you can hire someone who speaks the language in your local office. So I think it's become a lot less about is there business there, but is it sustainable and ROI driven business there?
Juan Pablo, this, is this at least the second time you've gone global. What have you learned as you've reached out beyond your home country?
Yeah, so before when we started Rappi in Colombia and started expanding international, the international expansion was really hard. We had to get a local team, we need to get drivers, we need to get restaurants, and it took a while, and it took many months of on the ground, doing it. With Juno, it was a little bit different. We're a software as a service, so we were able to expand right away. We started the company last year, and today we have integrations in all over, basically every single country in the world. We have more than 2 integrations in each country. And the goal is, how do we make it really simple for any company to expand international? The biggest issue that I had in Rappi was connecting to local acquirers, connecting to local processors, and seeing that it wasn't as easy. You did the integration, and then it didn't work, and then your customers are pissed off because they're not able to pay. And we want to remove that. So we started with a mentality to grow only in Latin America and have connections in Latin America, but our own customers like InDrive, McDonald's are like, hey, can you do expansion into the Caribbean? We have connections in the Caribbean. Hey, can you check if you can have integrations in Africa, in Asia, in Europe? So we're doing all of this infrastructure to be able to make it extremely easy for a company to start operating tomorrow in Spain. And not only have credit card and debit card that limits your market, you can have local payment methods, you can have cash, you can have bank transfer, anything in just a really simple solution to use.
Let's maybe talk a little bit more about some of the lessons you all have learned and mistakes you made that maybe these folks can learn from as they think about their own opportunities. Anybody have any stories to share?
I agree with what you said. I think the first thing, if you're a company starting, is to figure out what it is that you're going to do that's different and not build everything from scratch. In the beginning, we plugged into a lot of different players. Now we build some of that in-house. But when you start a company, the first thing you need to figure out is product market fit, and like how do you remove all the variables except for just one KPI, whatever that is, money, revenue, metrics, margin, pick yours. But like make everything else kind of not something you need to like worry about in the beginning, because you could spend a lot of time doing it and come back with like, there's no market for it. So totally agree. Like you don't have to build a bank from scratch. You don't have to do HR from scratch. You don't have to do payments from scratch. You can add that later and be like, here's our margin. We're going to take some of that back in-house. But at the beginning, just figure out what it is that you're going to do that's different and just make that the core focus.
I think for us, one of the biggest mistakes is we focused, and I think it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, focused too much on the potential and went too fast to too many places. And I think it became hard to sustain some of these places and make sure that we're getting, you know, the right ROI and we're supporting them properly. And we had to grow the team really fast, and I think that, you know, that made a lot of sense. We did what was right for our customers. But if I was to go back, I would probably stagger it a little bit more and make sure we win in the markets that we're in, and then keep moving in a more like thoughtful approach. I think that would be the thing I would do differently. It worked out in the end, but it was maybe more painful than it could have been if we did it more staggered.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest mistake that we made, first of all in Rappi, was thinking that we were able to just go to another country that maybe spoke the same language and just go ahead and go live. And we made that mistake in Mexico. I moved from Colombia to Mexico, and I thought, you know, the app was ready, the app was in Spanish, and there are actually many differences on the culture, on the wording, on how you say things, and we changed the whole mindset. And as we expanded into Brazil, Argentina, the first thing that we did was create a local team, and their job was to make sure that the app looked from that country. And if you speak to people to Brazil, sometimes they think that Rappi is from here because it looks really Brazilian. And then in Juno, I took all of that knowledge that we learned in Rappi, and we have been, every time we go into a new market and we do integrations, the first thing that we do is talk to the customer. Understand what are they looking for, how do they want to do it, because many companies think that because they did an A/B test or they did some research, they go and they launch a product, and the product is not really what the local consumer is looking for. So having a clear understanding on what is the local customer need, how do they want to do it, makes it much better. So when you launch, they're like, wow, this is exactly the way I want it. And in payments, this is huge. You can think that, you know, paying with a credit card, a debit card is the same all over the world. It's really different, especially in Brazil, where like a single card can be debit and credit at the same time. And for many years, international companies didn't understand that. So we're making sure that we understand the local market, we understand how the local consumer wants to pay, so that it feels local.
In the US right now, we're spending a lot of time talking about an economic downturn. It doesn't seem like it's evenly spread all over the world, though. Is having a global footprint healthy, just in terms of helping a company get through challenging times in some parts of the world?
For us, you know, I think the way we kind of look at it is there's no escaping the fact that like interest rates are going up. We're a banking business, so that affects different parts of what we offer. I think every startup is probably looking at it the same way, which is in some sense, you know, you kind of have to outlast the market. And I was having this conversation with our team where, you know, I don't really see it as like us competing in the market. We're really competing with the market and with time in some sense. And so it's exactly kind of what we pointed out in some, like we're picking and choosing which regions we double down on. We're picking and choosing which products we double down on. You do not have the luxury to be able to do everything at once. You kind of have to pick like your lane. And I do think it's going to get worse before it gets better, unfortunately, because I think rates are going to keep going up. So for us, it does have an impact, both in terms of what we can offer and also the companies that we kind of underwrite in some sense, because we see the effects of this pretty strongly.
I think, in my opinion, you know, like being international helps you a little bit avoid some of the downturns. Sometimes you're in one region and then you have economical issues and stuff, and you can actually use that international expansion to, in a way, level out what is working. But you know, for me, these hard times are the best time to build companies, are the times where we as an entrepreneurs can change countries, can change regions, and it's an amazing time to build. So, you know, as David mentioned yesterday, like he raised money for Nubank in one of the hardest times in Brazil, and it was part of the challenge. But at the end, if you see what he have built, it was thanks to that downturn, because at the end, when you have a downturn, you have a bunch of opportunities, and when we use technology to fix that, you can take a lot of advantage of that.
I mean, I agree with you if you're starting a company. I think if you're like at a certain stage and you depend on consumers who are maybe, it depends on the type of good that you are, or even, you know, like everyone's tightening marketing and software budgets. So I think it can be hard. And I actually think that it is important, the more wider spread you are, the less something happening in a region affects you. In our case, for example, APAC is doing really well right now. Like we exceeded all targets. So even though you can see the downturn really affecting, you know, the way people buy in US and even in Europe, in APAC we're not seeing that at all. We're seeing the downturn having less of an effect, and you see that in our revenue and how much, you know, we exceeded expectations in that region. So I think it is important to think about that, and it can actually help.
We're just about out of time, so could I ask each of you to just give 1 or 2 words of final thought for the audience as they think about their opportunities?
I always go back to one thing, and you know, as a second-time founder, you see a lot of different perspectives, and my core belief is it's never as good as it looks on the outside, and it's never as bad as you think it is on the inside, and it's always somewhere in between. And so like just having that perspective that every day is going to be a little bit different, but you should figure out why it is something that you want to do and kind of keep coming back to that. That's been very helpful for me.
I think my big one is that it's very hard to get to the right product right at the beginning, and the market changes. So as long as you keep on building, so if something that maybe doesn't work anymore, if you think something's going to work and it doesn't, if you just keep building, you'll get to the right product. And I believe anyone can build a successful company.
Yeah, I think my last word is, you know, take the risk and expand internationally. It was really hard before, and I think it's really easy, and it takes time, and many times you're afraid that expanding international could be something bad for your business, but take advantage of all the technology out there. Go ahead, go international. For sure, it has been one of the best things that we have done.
Juan Pablo, Mada, and Dilip, thank you so much, and thank you, audience. This was a great conversation.